But I'm not afraid to fly. I'm not afraid of terrorists in the air, not in the least. All I do when I go to the airport is I just look around the parking lot, and you can get a telltale sign as to whether there's a terrorist there. See, look at the picture. This is how you tell. How to tell if there's a terrorist at the airport. Now, that's a grossly insensitive joke, but I have a point to make about this. And here's the answer to the war on terror. The answer to the war on terror is not dropping bombs on people around the world. We know that doesn't work.
Welcome to Church of the Rock from Winnipeg. Stay tuned to this week's thought-provoking message from Pastor Mark Hughes.
Well, this morning, my annual Missions Pie Auction message is entitled, Pie in the Sky. All right, I'm going to give you a skill testing question right off the hop here. Here's my question. How many pastry chefs does it take to make a pie? It would be 3.14 if you know anything about math, right? Let me ask you another question. If you take a native Alaskan, you divide his circumference by his diameter, what are you left with? That'd be Eskimo pie, wouldn't it? If you take the sun and you divide its circumference by its diameter, what do you have? This one you should know, it's pie in the sky, which is what we're talking about today, right? My message this morning is pie in the sky, and let me tell you about that expression. It's an idiom that we know that we use in our culture, and it means an idea or a plan that sounds wonderful, but is so good that it can't possibly be true or possibly come to pass. It's like when we hear our government say they're going to balance the budget next year. You say, well, that's nice, but that's pie in the sky because you don't believe it, right? And so what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be talking about the challenge to take the gospel to the entire world. This is what Jesus said. He said, this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached to all nations, and then the end shall come. Some will say that's pie in the sky, especially when you consider when he says nations, what he's talking about. He's not talking about all the political nations, 192 nations in the world. That's not what he's talking about. The word he used there was the word ethne, or ethnic. And what he's saying is that this gospel of the kingdom will go to all ethno-linguistic groups in the world before he returns. That is the goal, a huge goal. You say, how many ethno-linguistic groups are there? There's over 16,000 ethno-linguistic groups in the world, and our challenge is to take the gospel to every last one of them. Now, the best way I can illustrate this morning, I think, is to show you a pie chart. And so if you look to the screen, I'm going to show you a pie chart of the challenge. You have the 16,000 plus ethno-linguistic groups in the world. There are 6,871 of them that are unreached people groups. These are groups that have not the gospel in their language. They do not have an indigenous church. Nobody is preaching the gospel in these places. That is 41% of the world's population. That is 2.87 billion people that have not heard the gospel of Jesus. So when Jesus says this gospel will be preached to all nations, some of you will say, that's pie in the sky. I'm here to tell you this morning that it's a reality and it will happen because Jesus said it would happen. Now, most of these people, most of these 41% of the world's population that are unreached, most of those people are in what is called the 1040 window. And again, if you look at the screen, here's a picture of the 1040 window. I'll tell you what the 1040 window is if you're new to this. It is a window throughout Africa or Asia from 10 degrees north to 40 degrees north. This is where 50% of the world's population lives. 80% of the world's poverty is in this strip. 93% of the world's unreached peoples are in the 1040 window. 93%, and yet, when you look at the church worldwide, only 7% of our budget goes towards the 1040 window for missions. Do you know what that means? That means that's a disproportionate relationship. People are spending their mission money other places. Only 3% of missionaries actually ever go to the 1040 window. There's good reason for that. It's a closed area oftentimes. Some places it's illegal to preach the gospel. There are almost 2,000 languages that don't even have the Bible in their particular native tongue. And so what we are doing is we as a church are saying, we're not going to stand by and let this scenario continue to play out. We're going to participate in Jesus' plan to see that the gospel goes to all nations. We have a budget in this church you probably don't know this, of $1 million for missions and outreach. Half of that goes to overseas missions. 80% of that, $400,000, goes into the 1040 window. That's a lot of money that we're putting in there. And some of you say, well, you know, it's not going to make a big difference. It's pie in the sky. Well, let me tell you about pie in the sky. Every year we have this pie auction. We sell maybe 150 pies throughout the day, and we raise $150,000 doing it. You tell people about that, they don't believe you. Why don't they believe you? Because it seems like pie in the sky, doesn't it, right? So what we're going to do today is we're going to look at a verse, and this verse is going to explain why this task is possible. And it's Joel chapter 2, verse 28, and this is what it says. It will come about after this that I will pour out my Spirit on all mankind. Your sons and your daughters will prophesy. Your old men will dream dreams. Say dream dreams. We're coming back to that. Your young men will see visions, even in your male and the female servants. I will pour out my Spirit in those days, the day of the Lord. I will display wonders in the sky. Say wonders in the sky. Because we're coming back to that as well. And in the earth, blood and fire and columns of smoke. The sun will be turned into darkness. The moon will be blood before the great and the awesome day of the Lord. And it will come about that whoever calls on the name of the Lord will be delivered. This is what the Bible says. There's going to come a day before Jesus returns, and He's going to pour out His Spirit upon all flesh, all mankind, the men, the women, the servants, the masters. It doesn't matter who they are. And He's going to pour out His Spirit, and He's going to give dreams, and He's going to give visions, and He's going to show wonders in the skies. And in the midst of that, whoever calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. He is telling us that there's coming a time when something amazing is going to happen where He pours out His Spirit. Now, most of you will remember the story because Peter quoted this verse in Acts chapter 2, remember? That was the day of Pentecost. And then in that day, they were gathered together in the upper room on the day of Pentecost, and the Spirit of God descended upon them. And the power of God descended upon them, and all of a sudden, everything changed. And they went out into the streets, and Peter explained what was happening, and he quotes Joel 2:28. And he says, this is that which was spoken of the prophet Joel. In that day, I will pour out my Spirit upon all flesh. And he preached this sermon from Joel chapter 2, verse 28. And who can tell me how many people came to Christ in that very one day after that message? Anybody know? I heard it. 3,000 people in one message in one day came to Christ. Is that because Peter was a better preacher than Jesus? Are you kidding me? What was it then? What was it then that produced such great results? I'll tell you what it was. It was the fact that the Spirit of God was poured out upon that time in history. See, this is what happens. When God pours out His Spirit, singular, all bets are off. Everything changes, and all of man's results are actually supercharged by His Spirit. Everything that we can do on our own all of a sudden takes on a new life, and it takes off. Now people say, well, that already happened. No. He says He was going to do this before the great and the awesome day of the Lord. And so, in fact, this is something we're still looking forward to. You say, well, what happened on the day of Pentecost? It was the first fruits of it. It was a portent of what was going to come. It was a sign of what Jesus can do when He pours out His Spirit, and all things change in the world. If you look throughout history, you will see again and again stories where God intervenes in history, where He sovereignly, for whatever reason, whatever time and place, He picks, and He just all of a sudden pours out His Spirit, and everything changes. I'm going to just tell you a couple of quick stories so you know what I'm talking about today. 1904, in the nation of Wales, there was a young man, a Bible school dropout, actually, by the name of Evan Roberts. He left Bible school, started to preach the gospel because he believed a revival was about to happen. He was speaking to small, tiny groups of 20 and 30 people, and he was telling them this. He was making a prediction, and he says, God is going to bring 100,000 Welshmen to Christ in the next year or two. Well, let me make a long story short. Over the next 18 months, 100,000 men, women, and children got saved in Wales in only 18 months. They had full-blown revival. It's called the Welsh Revival. You can go read about it. In 18 months, every single church was filled every single night with people. It didn't matter where Evan Roberts was. It was a revival because it caused by God's Spirit being poured out upon that entire nation. It was incredible. Every denomination, every church filled every single night. The coal miners, of course, coal mining was big in those days in Wales. The coal miners would come straight from the mine and come right into church. They'd be covered in coal black from the top of their head to their feet, and they would come to Christ in these services. And then the next day they would be back at work, and then they'd be back there covered in coal black again. It revolutionized what was happening down in the mines. Down in the mines they had these horses called pit ponies. And the pit ponies actually lived in the mines. And they lived in this darkness, and they pulled the coal carts out and back in and out and back in. And they responded to the commands of the miners. Well, the miners all got saved. And so they stopped swearing at the pit ponies. And the pit ponies didn't understand their commands when they weren't mixed with vulgarities. And they just stood there and didn't know what to do. They had to retrain the horses to understand non-vulgar language because God was transforming a culture and transforming a people. There was no crime. For the next 2-3 years, there was like zero crime in Wales. The police didn't know what to do with themselves. So they joined together in gospel quartets and went around singing in the churches, all dressed in uniform. God transformed a nation in only 18 months because his Spirit fell down upon that nation. Let me tell you what happened to Kathy and I in 1994. Kathy and I went to Argentina. In particular, we're in the city of Buenos Aires. And what had happened from 1989 to 1994 when we arrived is there had been a full-blown revival in Argentina. And God had begun to move in this nation in a really exceptional and a profound way. We went to one church called Waves of Love and Peace right in the midst of Buenos Aires. And in this church, in the last 5 years from when we got there, the last 5 years, they had baptized 150,000 people. One church had baptized 150,000 people in only 5 years. Do the math. That's 577 people every week. That's 82 people every single day. When we were there, people were coming to Christ. Whoever calls in the name of the Lord will be saved. They were going out into the courtyard where they had this fountain, I guess is the only way to describe it, and they were just dunking these people one after another. You say, how does a church handle 150,000 converts in 5 years? You know how they do it? They did a lot more services than 3 or 4 like we do. In fact, what they did was this. They started their services at 6 in the morning, and every 2 hours they would have another service, so one at 6, one at 8, one at 10, one at noon, all the way till midnight at night. But they didn't do that on Sunday. They did that 7 days a week. They had 9 services, 7 days a week. That's 63 services a week. That's how they handled all those people. And when we looked at that, we could see what was happening. We knew this wasn't because of some genius of man. This was because God had poured out his Spirit upon this nation and upon these people. And you see, that's what we're talking about here, is that God has the ability by his Spirit to snap his fingers, and at any time he begins to move in an exceptional and profound way. But see, what we need to do is look at this verse, and we see a few tidbits, a few signs of what God's going to do. He says, in the day that he pours out his Spirit, he's going to cause the young men to see visions and the old men to dream dreams. And see, dreams and visions, they're the language of the Holy Spirit. And when we look at the 1040 window, it's a daunting task. It looks like pie in the sky. And when we look at this, we say, I don't know how this can ever happen. There's so many people that don't know Christ. But then when you begin to look a little deeper, you begin to discover that people who are coming to Christ now, we hear these stories again and again. Some people tell us that most people who come to Christ in the 1040 window, amongst the Muslim people in particular, have had a dream about Jesus. Some people say most, some people say all. Some people say every one of them. We have a couple in this church, for example, that worked and lived in Kuwait for 4 years. He was an executive for an oil company. He was stationed there. They set him up really nicely. He had a driver and he had a chauffeur, or same person, I guess, but a maid and a cook and all these people that work for him. And the wife told us this just last week. She said, do you know, Pastor Mark, that every single one of the people, the Arab people that worked in our home, every single one of them had had a dream about Jesus. And when they found out we were Christians, they came to us and said, can you explain this dream to us? And you see, dreams are a part of the language of God. And he will send his Spirit and he will speak to them even in the night if he has to. And he is preparing their hearts for the gospel even now. But don't miss this. We have to do our part, right? They have to get the Word of God in their language. They have to have the gospel that's in some way available to them. There has to be churches. There has to be a way to disciple these people. That's where we come in. That's where missions come in. That's where all of our part comes in. God's going to do this. He said he would do this. He said he would pour out his Spirit before he returns. He's going to pour out his Spirit. I think the biggest revival that the world has ever known is actually yet to come. And I think, this is my prediction, that it's going to happen. in the 1040 window. And I want to be there to be part of it. I want to be there to help, and as I know you do, to see that God has an ability to move there, and the resources and the infrastructure for the gospel is already there in place for him to sweep across. He'll do it. He doesn't need us to do it. He'll do it. He'll bring the results. But we have to do our part. So what I want to do in the next few minutes is I want to share with you some of the projects. I can't share them all with you. We have so many projects going. As you heard earlier this morning, we have 11 projects going in Afghanistan and Pakistan alone. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to race through the 1040 window. I'm going to give you a few snapshots of some of the really important projects that we're doing so that you know what we're up to and why we're raising money today for missions. All right, so let's go back to the 1040 window. The first nation I want to look at is actually just south of the 1040 window, but very much 1040-ish, and it's the nation of Uganda. In the nation of Uganda in the north, there's a tribe called the Aringa people, and they have been 100% Muslim and 100% illiterate. And you and me as a church have been sponsoring a translation project. There's the translator right there. And he has not only been translating the gospel into the Aringa language, but it was only a verbal language. So they actually had to create a written language for these people. And as a result, they have a Bible, they have a written language, and for the first time in the Aringa history, there are 25,000 children that are in school for the very first time learning to read and write. You need to get excited about that. That is going to transform that nation. And here's what's really exciting. That project is done this year. And in June, there's going to be the dedication of the scriptures in the Aringa language. Our Pastor Keith is going to be there in Uganda for the dedication of those scriptures. And I am just so excited to get the pictures and the report back from that. So that's what's happening in Uganda. What we're doing is because that project is being retired, we're moving on to another project very similar. It's in the nation of Kenya. In Kenya, there's a tribe called the Wata. And the Wata, if you look at the picture here, they're a very, very primitive people. And you can see they live in these grass huts. And once again, they'll be getting a written language out of their verbal language. They'll be getting the scriptures in their own language. That project is just starting and is going to take another 9 to 11 years to complete. So that's the next nation we're involved in. So many of you remember that we've been working in the nation of Nepal. This project is about 3 years from being finished. It's what we call the Chamku project. The Chamku is actually a bit of a code name. These people are actually at the base of the Himalaya mountains where the Sherpas come from, and that project's got 3 more years and it'll be done. There's the translators there that have been working on this project, and they're going to have the gospel in their own language very, very shortly. If we move over to the nation of India, India has been another one we've been involved with for several years now. We've been working with what's called the Duko people, and the Duko, again, an unreached people group. There's the translators, and they're getting the Bible in their own language. This year, we're taking on a brand new project there called the Gurja people. The Gurja people is a huge unreached people group. There are 2 million people that do not have the scriptures in their language, and we are starting that project right now with your help today and what we raise here, and they'll be beginning to get that. Now here's the thing, they don't have to wait 10 years, because how many of you remember a year ago we took an offering for audio recorders? Remember those audio recorders? I'll show the picture of that here. And what we do is we get the gospel translated into their language on an audio basis, and those recorders, we bought 536 of these recorders, and they're all over Asia, all over India, and they're using them, and they're hearing the gospel for the very first time in their own language. And so within 2 or 3 years of the project beginning, we can have the gospel going to their language. This is such exciting things that are happening today with modern technology. Now, the last nation that I want to talk about as far as our Unreached People Groups projects is in Burkina Faso. Burkina Faso is the 4th poorest nation in the world, and the group of people that we're going to be dealing with are the Pujili people, and they are an illiterate people. They, again, have a spoken language but no written language, therefore they are illiterate. When you have a poor nation like Burkina Faso, and you have an illiterate people within a poor nation, these are amongst the most disadvantaged people on the entire planet. When you can't read and write, guess what? You're not highly employable. When you can't read and write, the employers take advantage of you. These people are so exploited, And we have taken on this project. They're not only going to get a Bible, but once again, they're going to get a written language, and they're going to get a literacy program, and we're going to bring them from here up to there. God reaches down to low places, and he brings people up, and he sets their feet upon the rock, and he brings them to sit in heavenly places with him. So those are our unreached people groups. There are 5 of them. We've taken on 2 more since last year, and you should be pretty excited about that. I shouldn't have to goad you into being excited, right? I want to talk about Afghanistan just for a moment. Afghanistan is a nation, ever since there was the invasion of Afghanistan with Canada and the U.S., we as a church thought, you know what, we can do better than that, than sending arms and sending bombs. And I appreciate our war people, our armed forces that go there and fight. I appreciate that. But at the same time, I know that guns and bullets and bombs are not going to lead people to Christ. And so as soon as that war started, we started investing in projects in Afghanistan. And there's a number of them, but I'll just tell you about a couple of the projects we're involved with. One of them is about half the population of Afghanistan speaks a language called Dari. And Dari has a Bible. There's a Dari Bible, but it's grossly out of date, and it doesn't have the vernacular. And the teams that we worked with on the ground there said, we really need to revise this scripture, the Dari scripture. And so we said, we will help you with that project. And so you are going to be funding the revision of the Dari language. But here's what happened. In this course of this conversation, they started telling us about the Pashto people. The Pashto make up about 33% of the Afghan population and a huge chunk of the Pakistani population. But the Afghan Pashto, which is about 15 million people, it turns out they didn't actually have a Bible at all in their own language. They were using the Pakistani version of it, which is a different dialect than their own. And so we said, you're kidding. And they said, no, and what we want to do is we want to actually translate the scriptures into the Afghan Pashto language. And they said, we've started the fundraising for this project. And we said, how much have you raised? And they said, $200. We said, seriously, you've raised $200? How much do you need? They said, we need another $20,400. You know what we said? We're in. We're down. Put us down for $20,400. We can do that. We're going to do it this morning. As part of what we're raising today, we're going to raise that $20,400 for the Afghan Pashto language. So this huge group, probably the biggest unreached people group in the world, 15 million people. Let me tell you something else that you probably don't know, is the Pashto is where the Taliban are from. It is where some of the worst Islamic terrorists in the world come from, is that very, very region, and we're going to do something about it. I don't know about you, but I'm not afraid to fly. I'm not afraid of terrorists in the air, not in the least. All I do when I go to the airport is I just look around the parking lot, and you can get a telltale sign as to whether there's a terrorist there. See, look at the picture. This is how you tell. How to tell if there's a terrorist at the airport. Now, that's a grossly insensitive joke, but I have a point to make about this. And here's the answer to the war on terror. The answer to the war on terror is not dropping bombs on people around the world. We know that doesn't work. You know what we need to do? We need to get the gospel into the language of the 99.9% of the Arabs around the world that are actually peace-loving people, that when they hear the gospel of Jesus Christ, which is the only religion in the entire history of the world that teaches to love your enemy, if we want to solve the war on terror, we need to bring the gospel of love to a world that is lost and dying and without hope and without Christ in this world. That's the answer to the war on terror. But this morning what I want to do is I want to talk about some other signs in the sky. And the signs in the sky I want to talk about are technological signs. 2 years ago, all of the Middle East, they all had cell phones. Well, today people don't have cell phones. They have what? Smartphones, right? How many of you have a smartphone? Anybody got a smartphone in the room? A bunch of you all have smartphones. And the thing about smartphone technology is this, is that everything can come to you through the sky, right? It's almost like a wonder in the sky, isn't it? That this information can arrive on your phone. You get not only does it work as a phone, but your email comes in, the internet comes in. How many of you have apps on your smartphone? Anybody got any apps? How do you get your app? You just download it. It just comes through this sky. It just arrives somehow miraculously into your phone. I don't know how the technology works. It just arrives. You just click a button and it comes. I want you to think about this, because the whole world is going to smartphones. I was going to say that smartphone technology and the ability to download the Bible via that, I was going to say that's the future, but I'd be incorrect. That's the present. That's the present technology that already exists. I want you to think about this. Give you an example. We're working in the nation of Pakistan with a man by the name of Cecil Benjamin. And I'll show you a picture of him here, coming right up. This is a picture of Cecil. Cecil was saved when he was 17 years old in Pakistan, and he's been working for 20 years. And Cecil believes that technology is the way to take the gospel to a closed nation like Pakistan. And so he's been working with television ministry, and he's been using the internet. He had a website up with a Facebook page that had 85,000 Pakistani people following his Facebook page until the government closed it down. And what Cecil has decided to do is he's producing 2 apps. And he says, what we can do is we can produce these apps, and people, all they have to do is download them. There's nothing the government can do to stop us. And the one app, I love the name of the app. One's called Namo, and it's actually 40 Days with Jesus is what it's all about. But the other one is called GoPak. I'll show you the slide here. Here's the GoPak app. And this is what's on the GoPak. GoPak stands for Gospel to Pakistan, in case you're wondering. And the 7 titles of the books are written there. We've got the Bible in their own language. In the Urdu language, there's some information for women. There's on how to become a Christian. The plan of salvation is all there. And this information will come to them in just a few moments' time with one click as they download that app. Now, here's what's amazing about it. When you think about doing this, when you smuggle in Bibles, you're breaking laws, you're having to cross borders, you're risking your life. In many of these nations, it's against the law to proselytize and to distribute the gospel. But if you do it over the internet or through the cell or through Wonders in the Sky, guess what? You're crossing borders left, right, and center. No, you're not putting anybody at risk. And we can take the gospel to the world. And so when we heard what Cecil wanted to do, we said, we're in, and we're going to fund the production of these 2 apps. And the other part of this, and I don't want you to miss this, is see, how many of you notice when you have an app that the developers of that app seem to have a way of contacting you and sending you updates? Big Brother is watching you. You do know that, don't you? And his name is Google, right? His other name is Apple. And you know what I'm talking about. You are not alone. Be afraid. Be very afraid. But at the same time, why don't we start using that technology for our purposes? And why don't we begin to... See, when we smuggle Bibles into countries, people are at risk, and then you have no contact with the people. You don't even know who has the Bible. But when you do it through an app, guess what? You have contact with that person, and they can contact you back. That's the wave of the future, people, and it's really the wave of today. And we're going to be on the cutting edge of this. We're going to raise this money, and we're going to do this thing today because we are convinced that when Jesus said, this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached to all nations, and then the end shall come, we know it's not pie in the sky. We know it is a reality because he said, I will pour out my spirit on all mankind, and then the end will come. Are you in it? Yeah. Let's get into it. Hello, Mark Hughes here from Church of the Rock. What you're seeing on the screen is some of the amazing creations from the pie auction.
2,300 years from now, 2,300.
One pie sold for an incredible $5,200.
Sold 52 and a half.
Of course, no pie is worth that kind of money. That's not what it's about. It's about giving towards missions in the 1040 window. This year's pie auction raised a staggering $130,000. Speaking of which, I want to thank all of you who were part of it last year and partnered with us, and give you another opportunity this year to partner again. Everything you give, 100%, will go to buy Bibles and advance the gospel in the 1040 window.
1,600.
So here's what you need to do. Go to our website, find Donate Online, click on the 1040 window, and we'll make sure everything you give, without taking any administrative costs, will go to advance the gospel around the world. God bless, and let's build the kingdom of God together.
Church of the Rock has services every Sunday at 1397 Buffalo Place, and we invite you to join us when you're in the Winnipeg area. If you'd like a booklet to help you understand more about God's gift of forgiveness and reconciliation through Jesus Christ, please contact us, and we'd be happy to send you a free copy of the Book of Hope. Thank you for watching, and God bless you.